My name is Collison Lore. I'm a user engagement expert. I work along the climate information services value chain, meaning I work together with producers of weather and climate information. These producers are either conventional producers, that is meteorologists, or indigenous producers. I also work with users of weather and climate information at various levels, right from the intermediate users who comprise NGOs and other actors, policymakers, and above all, the end users at the last mile level. Radio. Radio is the king, and this is a fact in Africa. Radio is the king. Why would I choose radio? Because radio not only reaches the last mile, it also can go online. So you can have online radio, and that means you're able to reach as many people as you possibly can. And sometimes the challenges that we face as nations across the continent include the fact that we need to send this information out to as many people as possible as quickly as possible. So my choice of radio is in terms of numbers. My choice as radio is in terms of convenience. You don't have to have the set. You can listen to it online in some cases. And again, even that information, you can get it, the sound bites can be gotten out of the radio and shared on platforms such as WhatsApp, just to make sure that people get the information. So radio is interactive. Radio allows people to challenge, to ask questions, to get clarification, to speak out their views about issues of weather and climate. Radio is the king. Oh yes, indeed, radio is relevant. It'll be relevant today, tomorrow, and it can only get more and more relevant. And I will tell you why. Because the radio is interactive. Because the radio allows for phone calls, phone-ins, people sending comments, giving feedback, people listening when they're doing other things. Those characteristics of radio make radio relevant every day. The fact that the broadcast, the journalists in the studio speaking out to thousands, tens of thousands, millions of listeners across the land, people tend to associate them with certain elements. For example, in my case, if they are associated with weather and climate and with these climate change issues that are affecting our countries, radio remains very relevant, because often you will hear somebody say, yes, I had it on radio. That means the levels of trust on radio are still very high. Again, there is something called community radio. This is a radio that actually answers your immediate needs in your immediate environment. What more can be relevant more than that? Radio remains extremely relevant and extremely useful as a tool to communicate not just matters of climate change and improved productivity, but also matters of emergency and changing weather. These are things that radio will keep radio relevant for now and times to come. It's a question that is very tricky, because often these are two different media that you would look at. If you look at internet, it's on its own, and radio is on its own as well. So you can use radio to counter misinformation on the internet. However, you need to know, again, your audience. What kind of misinformation is going on? Is it misinformation about climate change? Is it misinformation about health matters? And if that were the case, who are your audience? Are your audience the type of people who consume the kind of misinformation that is being spread out online? So that then you don't introduce a new thing to the audience that they may not have known, and now they begin to believe in the falsehood that you're trying to debunk. So it's very important to understand these falsehoods that are being peddled. They are targeting who? Are they targeting people at the grassroots? Are they targeting a community? Who are they targeting? Then once you have seen that it is your audience that are in the crosshairs, it is your audience that is being targeted potentially, then you can then quickly use radio to debunk that. So it is very possible. The only word of caution that I would give would be that do not introduce something to your listeners that they did not have, and then some of them begin to believe it. So it's very important that as you go about that, you have understood your audience, who they are. If they are a potential target of that misinformation, do your best to debunk it with facts, and radio will serve you well in order for the people to understand the truth. So it's one thing that has to be done with ample caution. Yes, radio can be used to debunk those untruths that are often peddled online. Yes, there are limitations, severe limitations that face radio within the region. The first thing is money. Another thing that faces radio in terms of limitation is lack of access to training and trained personnel and manpower. The third thing is the limitation in coverage. Some radio stations intend to cover a wide area and therefore give you aspirational figures as opposed to real figures. They tell you we reach 500,000 people, but in reality they reach about 50,000 people. So that way they then tend to inflate these numbers, which then makes it difficult for people to actually know the truth of where these radios reach unless a scientific study is undertaken. Now, speaking of money, money is needed by these radio stations to ensure that they pay their bills, they meet their obligations to their staff, they meet their obligations in terms of taxes, they meet their obligations to the community, and then generally are supposed to be good corporate citizens. However, because this is a competitive and cutthroat business, you find that radios tend to lack these resources and are therefore always living on the edge, making it difficult for them to make ends meet. Then we had mentioned that there is a challenge of training. Again, speaking of money, these two are related. Because if you do not have money to pay your bills, you will definitely not have money to train your staff. So often people are brought on board, maybe as interns, and then they stay on and on. Some people learn on the job, and in most cases they end up learning and bringing issues that may not really be very useful to the profession. Some people then say there's the issue of attitude. Some people say, oh, but radio is just talking. You just go and sit in a studio and you talk. They forget that this talking is supposed to be professional. It is something that people learn in school. It is something that people learn both in school and at work, and not in only one place. If you only learn it in school and you don't do it practically, then you have a problem. If you do it practically and you never learned anything in school, then you also have a challenge. So there is a need for a mix of a balance for that as well. So there are also challenges of stiff competition. So if you don't play my music, I turn the radio to something else. Yet I'm talking about something very important in terms of climate and food security. So these are very important points that are serious limitations that are facing radio as we work today. Oh yes, indeed. Radio can have a very, very major impact on work in the IGAD region. Why do I say this? There is this saying that says we are stronger together. If you have scattered radios across the region, each speaking its own thing, you end up with what you refer to roughly as the Tower of Babel syndrome, where the radios are speaking in their own language, saying their own things, and therefore the achievements cannot be measured. But if we are to have a coordinated movement of radio, meaning that even if the radio is broadcasting in Afan Oromo, is broadcasting in Somali language, is broadcasting in Amharic, is broadcasting in Kiswahili or in English or Luganda or in any French or Arabic, any language that is spoken in the IGAD region, that then means that first of all, the radios would be coordinating their message. If we are talking about food security, then we will have it in different languages. It will be serving different people. The impact would be major, would be profound. If there is a coordinated movement of radios, the trainings can be synchronized so that some radios don't get more trained than others. Once we have a pool of manpower across the region that has been so well trained, then the impact will clearly be felt. Because one, we will have journalists who are able to understand matters of international mobility, matters of the emerging crisis of climate change refugees. They will understand conflict issues and how to discuss them on radio, conflict-sensitive journalism. Surely, if there is coordinated work between the radios, standards can be enforced. The radios can agree that this is a particular standard that we want to achieve in terms of our reportage for matters of weather and climate. Again, They can pool sources so that we know that if we are discussing locusts in East Africa region, we know which institutions to reach out to, who in those institutions can be of help to us, and how best we can report to our people about these issues of climate change and their adverse effects. Definitely, radio can also allow us to engage our people to get their feedback on the work that IGAD and the IGAD institutions are doing alongside their partners in the region. There is so much that radio can do. The impact is profound, particularly if there is unity of purpose and a set agenda to ensure that the people receive information that is easy to understand and can trigger them to action.